Alright, now that we've finalized our collage and we've dissected our description of the creature, we can actually start sketching now. Now it's very important that we always keep the collage in view. Personally, my setup, I have multiple monitors going at once, and so what I'll usually do is I'll drag my reference collage over to the side and I'll have it in view as I'm working in Photoshop. If I'm drawing with paper, I'll either draw next to my monitor, or I will print out my reference collage and again have that next to me while I'm working. Now the reason why we do this is, as I've mentioned before, we have to make sure that all of our work is grounded in reality. I really enjoy working on paper. It's a very fast way to work. My process is very simple. I actually took some shots here. Let's bring in a few examples. So, here are some examples of my sketches in my little moleskin sketchbook. My materials are very simple. It's just a light gray Copic marker and a ballpoint pen. I really like this Pentel RSVP pen. I find that when I draw with a ballpoint pen, I become more decisive. I've noticed that when working with pencils, I tend to make more mistakes because I know I can always erase. A ballpoint pen makes me much more decisive and gets me through the sketch very quickly. Now this is a very small sketchbook, and one of the tricks that I use in order to get a lot of quick ideas down in a short amount of time is I will draw very small. You can see the scale of the drawing to the ballpoint pen. It's really not very big, and I can do a drawing like this in about 5 minutes. Being able to do a sketch that quickly is very important because you want to have the opportunity to explore a lot of options in a short amount of time. Here you can see I've done a little bit of exploration here, and you can see the influence that the reference has had on my sketches. Let's zoom in here. You can see that I was playing around with the rock rubber having some weird alien tongue coming out of his head. Here you can see I'm pulling from a lot of the praying mantis reference. I'm really drawing from the ant head, trying to find different shapes within that I can utilize for the rock rubber's head. So there's quite a bit of exploration here, and these sketches do not take long at all. So you can really see how the reference influences the concept. Now this page is filled with just straight up ballpoint pen sketches. The process is very simple. You quickly do a fast lay-in, applying minimal pressure to the page, and then as you move forward you start to commit to forms and apply more pressure with a pen and use a darker outline. This is a great way to start your concepts. Early on when I started working in concept art, Photoshop took me a while to incorporate into my pipeline, and I found that if I just scanned in a drawing and did my value work in Photoshop, I actually moved a lot more quickly through the design process. I could do 10 quick little doodles, scan them into Photoshop, add a multiply layer, and resolve them in grayscale, and I would have 10 options in a very short amount of time. So I also like to give myself the opportunity to refine my ideas by doing a quick gray light marker roughen. I'm able to explore shape and really not commit to anything until I start working with a ballpoint pen. I like working this way because it gives me 2 chances to get the design right, and it's still very fast. Here's an example of what that looks like. So I scanned this drawing in twice. Here you can see my initial gray marker lay-in, and you can tell that I'm really drawing through all of my shapes. You can see the head, the rib cage, and the pelvis, as well as the ground plane, all resolved. And these are things that you need to have a solid understanding of before moving into ballpoint pen detail. So here is the quick draw over. Now again, remember this is smaller than the size of my pen, and so it's actually very quick. Once I have the piece in Photoshop, I can then clean up all of the texture from the page, all the varying values by using curves in Photoshop. So I'm just going to go to my adjustment layer here, and I'm going to go to curves, and with this white eyedropper, I'm going to define the area of the page that I want to be white, and this yellow is kind of getting in my way, so I'm just going to click on that, and now you can see I've isolated my drawing a bit more. I can click on the gray marker and separate that. Now all I have is the line work. This is a pretty fast way to clean up your scans. Now that I have a fairly clean sketch, I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to make it a multiply layer. So I'm going to go in here, and I want to resolve the concept a little bit more in grayscale. So I'm just going to take a very simple brush. I call it my number 1. And as you can see, it's just a bunch of repeated circles. And I'm going to use a medium gray value. On a multiply layer, you'll notice that you can see the line work through the paint. Now this is a great way to add value to a piece. So I'm just going to go a little lighter, and I'm going to fill in my silhouette. Now, you might notice that this isn't pure black and white. So before I fill in my pure silhouette, I'm going to go back to my adjustment layers, and I'm going to go to my hue saturation, and I'm just going to take the saturation all the way down. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is because I tend to sample from my painting, and I don't want any color to get in the way of my value work. I want to save color for the very end. And so I'm just going in, and I am filling in the silhouette of this character. Now, if I keep this painting very clean, I could quickly hit Control and tap on my layer to instantly select the painted area. Now this comes in handy when creating masks, so I'm going to keep that in mind, and I'm only going to paint in the areas that I want to be gray for now, so that I have the option of creating, very fast masks down the line. Let's paint this all in. Now, I use this technique a lot in video games. In video games, I've noticed that clients don't want to go into 3D until the very end when the design has been approved and they're just creating a production model. So I can generate a ton of ideas this way, get the design approved, and hand the concept off to a modeler and move on to the next creature on the project. Nowadays, I might try to model one of the creatures myself, just because it's so much fun. Here I'm pushing the toes a little further. I'm just going to fill this in. Let's see how long this takes. Just working my way down. Fingers are something that I don't really mind resolving in silhouette. Let's fill in that tail. So this is an interesting option for the rock grubber. You can see it has a sinister quality to it, and I got a lot of influence from the ant's head as well as the very thin reference here. So this is a pretty fun guy. I might start modeling him without doing too much more exploration. We'll see what happens. Maybe I can come up with a better option. Now, I still like leaving my characters vague. Now, there's a lot of information here, but I don't want to go too tight with these sketches because you never know what happens when you take these concepts further. While sculpting this character in ZBrush, I might come up with some new ideas that I might want to try. So really, I just want to get the basic concept approved without truly committing to every little detail, so I can allow for happy accidents in my pipeline. That keeps it interesting for me. Even though I didn't draw a little vertebrae here, I'm going to add it. So I'm going to hit Control, I'm going to check my grayscale, fill in, and it looks like I have a nice solid silhouette. I'm going to hit Control D, and I'm just going to touch up this tail a bit. Alright. So now we can get a real feel for the silhouette of this creature, and he's feeling solid right now. So I'm going to start adding darker and lighter values to this concept. You can never be too clean with that silhouette. Let's just make sure this is working here. Alright. In layer, I'm now going to go a little lighter with my values. Now if I hit Control, tap it again, I can guarantee that I'll only be working within that shape, within that silhouette. And so I'm going to make sure that's selected. The traveling ants are a little distracting, so I'm just going to hide that for now. And I'm going to add my lighter values. You want to define a light source. I'm going to say it's just right around here, maybe coming down, hitting him in the top of the cranium. That would expose a lot of detail there. So I'm just going to come in and I'm going to define some areas that the light is hitting. You can see it's very, very quick. Notice how quickly these forms start to lift off of the page. I'm getting closer to creating something dimensional. I'm also going in and my choices are influenced by the anatomy. The crest of the skull here, the peaks on these vertebrae, the top of the thigh. I'm just asking myself, if this was dimensional, how would light hit this object? It couldn't hurt to have that reference next to me. So right now, I'm getting most of my information from these images of these very thin people. And it's really interesting to see how light hits them. And when you're looking for your photo reference, don't just look at the forms. Don't just look at the details. Look at the lighting in your reference. Lighting is everything. And a good photo will have great texture, great detail, great resolution, and also good lighting. Lighting is everything. It's how we define form. I've been teaching over at Gnomon, the school in Hollywood, for, I think, almost 6 years now. And this is the majority of what I teach. I don't really teach 3D over there. My reason for that is design is so important that I wanted to keep things 2D. They have a lot of great teachers over there for 3D, and my contribution is just design based. I do a quick ZBrush demo, but I have no assignments that are based in ZBrush. You can see how fast this technique is. Now I might go another value darker, so I'm just selecting my original medium gray, and I'm just going to add a little bit of a darker value to it, and I'm going to define some stronger shadows. I might change this up a bit. I think I like the idea of it having a deep nasal cavity, maybe something skeletal. I'm starting to really like this guy. Now, if light is coming down from here, we might have a cast shadow of the bicep, the upper arm, casting a shadow over the rib cage. Now, when thinking about cast shadows, it's not just about the object that is blocking the light and casting the shadow over another form. It's how that shadow rolls over that other form. So you're actually able to describe two forms that way. Lighting is very important to understand. Now, I find that people who draw and paint well can eventually sculpt very well in clay or in 3D. Now, the reason why that is because it's a lot harder to create the illusion of dimension than it is to actually work with something that is dimensional, like clay or like a primitive form in a 3D program. When you start with a bag of clay, you already have light, form, dimension, perspective. These are things that you don't have to worry about. Your concern is moving that material around to create your desired effect, your desired sculpture, your desired design, your concept. But when you have to draw something and you're staring at the void of a blank page, you are completely responsible for everything in creating that illusion of dimension. So it is much more challenging. Not bad. We're getting quite a bit of form out of this guy. And I'm pretty happy with it so far. So now that we have enough detail, I also want to catch just a few highlights, a few tendons, some peaks. You want to save those sharp highlights for areas in the anatomy where the bone is coming up right against the skin. You can see in this photo, that's where the highlights are the strongest. So this is phenomenal reference. Now you want to sneak up on your darkest darks and your lightest lights. So we've been working within the middle range of our grayscale slider this entire time. You can see how the line work acts as an anchor for the concept. When we take that line work away, you'll notice there isn't really much there. So a good drawing can save you a lot of time. So after I get to a point where I like what's happening in grayscale, let's add a few highlights. I really want to define the joints on this creature. I want his movement to be very obvious, how he walks around. So joints have to be clearly defined in a creature design. It really helps to explain his ability to move, how he moves, to animators. You also notice this isn't a very extreme pose for this creature. I want to be able to show a lot of him. And so when I draw creatures, I usually stick with a 75-degree angle, and I like to turn all of my forms slightly. I've noticed there are a lot of artists who will do just a straight profile on a creature or a straight front view. And when that design gets approved and it moves on to a 3D modeler, or perhaps they're going to make a practical puppet out of this creature, it doesn't describe enough form. When designing a creature in 3/4, you really get a feel for how these forms turn. So I'm going to go a little darker even in the nose right now. That's very cool. So this guy's feeling pretty mischievous. I really like him, and he might be the base for my ZBrush sculpt. Some cool stuff. I like the quills. There are a lot of things here that make this creature eerie. I think the nasal cavity really helps too. I want him to have a bit of a blank stare, but we could get a lot of personality out of this creature still. Let's make sure that this bicep turns. All right. So now that I have filled in my multiply layer, and you'll notice that this is actually very much like working with markers, and that's where I came up with the technique. Before working in Photoshop, I would always work with markers, and so I would do my rough lay-in of a design, and then use a felt tip marker, fine felt tip marker, to do all of my line work. And then I'd go back in with my grayscale markers. I might do washes of color with colored markers, but you never lose the drawing. And that's how a lot of concept art was accomplished, I would say, before 2000. You look at some of my favorite art books, and I think like the last great example of marker work in a concept art book was actually the episode 1 and 2 books for the new Star Wars films, and you see a lot of great work in there that was done on paper. Still a viable way to get your ideas out. Alright, so now that we have our value, we can add a new layer, and I reserve this layer for highlights. I might paint over some of my line work, and I still like to sneak up on my values. So considering that, I'm going to deselect my selection. Considering that my light source is here, well, actually, you know what? I think my light source is here. We're seeing a lot of light on this guy. I'm going to go in and I'm just going to start adding some lighter highlights, quickly selecting the medium value. I'm just going to build it up a bit, and I really like the lighting reference here. Let's zoom in. So we're always working with the reference in front of us. I might take down my flow a bit. I want something a little softer. Remember, we're just adding a few highlights here and there. Personally, I like rough sketches. When I first started working in the industry, that was actually my job entirely. My first gig out of Art Center when I graduated in '05 was designing for Stan Winston. It was a great job. I got it the following week after I graduated, and I spent the entire time there at a drafting table, just generating ideas, and I could come up with sometimes 50 ideas a day just by drawing very small and moving on to the next sketch. Now, in 2006, it still was common for drawings in the concept phase in films and video games. Then, as time moved on, it became less and less common. And so I had to learn new skills. I embraced Photoshop, and then eventually I embraced 3D. Because now more than ever, even in the early stages of concept art, clients want to see photorealism. When it comes to working on big budget films, photorealism uh, shows up very early on in the concept phase. So that took some getting used to. Some nice weird highlights here. I want a very bright highlight in the eye. I want it to be just this black reflective surface, almost like black marbles, like soulless eyes. You got little two pairs of mandibles here. There's a lot of personality in this guy. Let's look at our ant. That's pretty cool. Got some textures. You can see the overall head shape still being influenced by the ant photo. And I want wrinkly skin. What's going to be really challenging about sculpting this creature, resolving the design, is how we transition from soft skin to probably a more brittle bone or maybe a rigid cartilage for the mandibles. Building up some more highlights. It's coming in here. It's pretty fun, little guy. So this is more than enough to get the idea across, whether it's just for myself as reference before I move on to sculpting in ZBrush, or to quickly show a client, if that client is open to seeing rough sketches. And it does vary quite a bit. At any given point, I'm working on multiple projects, and each client requires something different. Some shows every single concept must be photorealistic. In other shows, they want a ton of loose sketches before going to photorealism. You must be adaptable. Yeah, that's good enough. Maybe this gets a little too dark in here. Gotta watch my values. There we go, it's pretty fun. I want to make sure that he's nice and grounded. I'm going to add a little bit of a shadow under here for him. Let's drag that down. Not bad. Okay. Let's see our creature. I'm just going to do a quick crop. We're going to zoom in. And you'll notice when I was working, I tried to keep him as far away from me as possible. When you're working on a design, you want to see all of it as you're working on the concept. Try not to zoom in that much. Also, try not to hit Control Z. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think I hit Control Z the entire time. And the reason for that is you want to program yourself to make better choices while you're working digitally. If you're constantly hitting Control Z, you're less likely to commit to the last strokes that you make. And it's very hard to propel forward. So not bad. Another thing I like to do to sell a concept is I like to sharpen my image. You can see it's a bit soft here and there, and I want to sell it as a sketch. So here I just duplicated everything. Oops. You can see this is a flat copy. And I did that by hitting Shift Control E. That copies everything seen in the plane. And I'm just going to go to my filter here. And let's do my unsharpen filter. And I'm just going to crank this up a little bit. The reason why I like to do that is because I want what I'm turning in to read as how I intend it. Meaning, I want clients to know this is a sketch if I'm showing it to them. And so I don't mind leaving in a lot of the sketchy lines and keeping it crisp. I don't want them to think that this is a concept that's finalized. I want them to know that it is a work in progress. And so I like to leave in all of this charm of these sketchy little lines. And that's a great way to get a concept done. Just start in ballpoint pen, bring it into Photoshop, resolve it in grayscale. Fun little critter. Now I'd like to cover concepting within Photoshop. Now we already did some rough sketch work on paper, and my technique for working in Photoshop is I like to mimic what I do traditionally. Photoshop, though, is very different, but the first step is pretty similar. So instead of using a grayscale marker, I'm just going to start to paint in grayscale. I'm going to sneak up on my values. I'm going to use a medium gray, just something a little darker than the tone of the canvas. And I'm going to keep my reference in front of me the whole time. So let's say you're working with a client, he wants 3 options of, for his concept. So I'm going to start picking areas of the collage that I want to base these concepts on. We're going to start with the dust mites. So with my number 1 brush, I have it at a slight angle, and I've increased the hardness slightly. I'm just going to start doodling. I'm going to treat everything like a drawing at first. Now, I've noticed on a lot of tutorials, I'll see a lot of silhouette studies where artists will just do these flat black options with no detail inside, no draw through. And when I say draw through, this is what I'm referring to. Drawing through your forms completely. It's very important because it's the best way to define form, to define volume. You can see here I've plotted down my ground plane, and I'm just placing my limbs to the floor. Now, I want to know, first and foremost, what the largest landmass is doing and what angle it's at before I start to worry about smaller details like the legs. So we're going to come in here. Now, if this thing is large, I'm going to want to widen those feet a bit. So I'm being a little messy here. Let's go in. And I'm just changing up some of the reference. Now you'll notice I have quite a bit of room on this page, but I zoomed in and I'm working very small. And look at how quickly I was able to jot down the full body creature. I like the little quills. Now if a person is, let's see, how big is this guy? Let's make him maybe the size of a baby rhino. So person would be right about here. I want to make sure that his weight is evenly distributed and that he can move well. Now I'm just going to start to fill in that silhouette a little bit, and this is going to act as my marker lay-in. I'm just going to erase some of the excess lines. There we go. And I want to change him up a bit, so I'm looking around, and let's give him some horns. I think that would be cool. Make him pretty aggressive. Right there. Right there. Okay. So that's one simple sketch. I'm just going to go and I'm going to put this guy over to the side. Let's move him over here. And on a new layer, I'm going to start another one. I'm going to move my way down the collage. Let's do something more in this realm. I'm always asked, how do you come up with all of these ideas? Now, the collage is one great technique for doing that. Another great technique is to literally just write a list of options. For example, let's say I'm going to draw a werewolf, and the client wants, say, 3 options of a new kind of werewolf. Well, instead of mixing a man and a wolf, I might change it up a bit. I might do a man and a greyhound. That's a very different type of creature. And so the next one might be a man, a gorilla, and a bulldog, and it might be that combination. And so before I ever start drawing, what I'll often do is just write a list, a brief description of options for the potential designs. And I can come up with quite a few, take my best ideas, and just start drawing them out. So here, I'm focusing mainly on the frog creature. Let's grab my X and Y here, and I'm getting to the bottom of the page as quickly as possible for my grubber. Now, how do we make it different? Maybe it has a head that's more like a vulture. And this would be a much stubbier rock grubber. I like the idea of him having these weird legs. So this is all underdrawing right now. I want to make sure that he's got feet. If he's navigating on those rocks, his toes are going to help him curl around those rocks, and we'll be able to use that for leverage and keep moving. But you can see I'm keeping everything in 3/4. Let's move this down here. Let's come up with another body type. So we have the praying mantis. Let's see, do I have any full body praying mantis shots? Well, we've got the bug here. Now, at any given time, you might want to add to your reference collage. Oh, that's kind of close. It's not a mantis, that's for sure. And you might want to refine your collage as well. Let's say you hone in on one of your sketches and not all of your collage applies to that. Well, I would refine the collage to the key pieces of reference that you are currently in need of. Always stay organized. Alright, so let's look at some kind of weird mantis type creature. We're always starting off with the largest landmass. It's always the torso. And let's bring the rest of the thorax down here. Make sure that we are pointed at a descriptive angle. And we're going to start playing around with the legs. And I love these backwards legs. Let's make sure we know where that ground plane is. Being able to ground your creature is very important You want to know where the ground plane is so that you know how to work the pose, how he relates to the ground, how his weight shifts the contrapposto of the creature. That's interesting. Maybe he's got two sets of legs back here. And just like with the marker lay-in, at this stage I can tell whether or not these are concepts I want to refine. And it does not take me long to resolve these. I mean, each one of these sketches is probably around a minute. I'm going to add just a little bit of value so that I can see the solid shapes of these forms. And that's okay. So, I'm not too crazy about this one. I'm just going to move it over. Now, no matter how complicated the idea is, there is always a fast way to get through it. Now, it's a lot easier to imagine a complex creature as a stick figure. And we've all made stick figures before. Let's move these arms up. It's simply a matter of taking what we know from making human stick figures and applying them to a slightly different body type. As we looked earlier at the anatomy reference, we know that anatomical patterns occur in all mammals. The anatomy is very similar. The bones are very similar. There's only a few things that are different in the bones of mammals. For example, quadrupeds like cows, cats, they don't have collarbones. Primates have collarbones. And this is a very interesting shape. It's a bit sinister, and I can feel a lot of the vulture here in this guy. This is a cool silhouette for our rock grubber. Maybe these long arms help him navigate over the rocks, while these little tiny arms under the chest help to carry the delicate eggs away. He just kind of holds these and holds the eggs and then brings them into his chest and then quickly scurries off. I like the idea of the little arms. I might use that, little T-Rex arms. So we have some very different options here, and a lot to go on. So let's move this guy out of the way, shrink him down. Let's try something else. Now, I'm keeping all of these on different layers. What else do we have here? I want to do something a bit more aggressive. Maybe we'll go back to the dust mite. Something, let me think. So again, starting with the largest mass, I want to know the architecture. I want to know the mechanics of this creature. Starting to really like these backwards arms. They'll give this very aggressive V-shape silhouette in the front. We'll work out these joints a little later. Let's see. Maybe it'll be like a silverback gorilla, smaller legs in the back here. So this initial lay-in reminds me very much of just roughing stuff out with a marker. Maybe he has these very aggressive shoulder blades that pop up here. You always have to think in terms of movement. When you make an anatomical choice, you have to back it up with function. So we've got a lot of solid options here for the grubber, and it did not take a lot of time to do these sketches. I'm not crazy about this guy. Let's get rid of that guy. So I really like this vulture guy, and I wanted to blow him up and resolve him a bit more. As you can see right now, I am filling in the underdrawing with value, and I'm pushing the silhouette of the design while still leaving traces of the underdrawing for structure. I'm only working with about 2 tones, and as you can see, I'm going to lower the opacity, and I'm going to start doing my line work. So this works just like traditional media. It's a new layer, and I like to treat it like tracing paper, and I'm just using line to finalize my design. Once the line work is done, I am going to paint under it my values and refine the concept. I just want to make sure that I resolve everything in line. I don't want to leave anything open because I know that that'll give me some trouble as I work in value down the line. Just trying to get every little indication of detail in here. That's not bad. There we go. Now I'm blocking in my shadows. Trying to move as quickly as possible. Of course, this really isn't me. Like I've mentioned, this is, I think, 10 times my speed. And I'm using 2 values to define the form. I've identified the light source, and I'm just jumping around a bit, adding lighter values. This is a great way to work. I always have my line work as my guide. Here I've zoomed into the face. I want to make sure that I know what that creature's face really is. Anytime you're doing a creature design, bear in mind that the face really is the payoff. If you're working on a typical horror film, the formula is that you see glimpses of the creature throughout 90% of the movie. So the overall silhouette of the creature has to be exciting, but the head is the payoff. I've been told that you can design a creature from the head down with that in mind. Getting the head approved is the hardest part. The thing that's wonderful about getting the head approved first on a show is that all of the patterns that you establish in the face, the textures and materials, have to repeat themselves in order to make for a convincing design. And so if you can get the head approved, then you at least know what patterns you must repeat throughout the rest of the body. So you can see I'm spending quite a bit of extra time on the face, making sure it's interesting. Reintroducing a little bit of line work. You know, this is still a sketch. It can still be loose. All in all, the process is not dissimilar to starting off with a drawing on paper. In all honesty, the scan drawings help me move a bit more quickly than in Photoshop. And as you can see, there really isn't that much of a difference in the result.